Ex-prisoners, how does your experience in prison compare to how it is portrayed in the movies? It was a lot more boring, very little excitement, very little violence, lots of wanking, lots of reading, noisy, and full of morons, both the people running it and the people living it. No fricking that I saw. Lots of theft and posturing. Sounds like a deployment to me. I know someone that was in women's prison and there was no RP, but she was asked if she was gay for the stay. She was not and it was respected. There was no salon, haircuts were performed using nail clippers. She also said that there was so much drama that it was like being in high school again, but worse. I talked with a few women prisoners that worked on the Rainbow Fire crew. They called the gay for the stay prisoners lurds, lesbians until release date. My stay was several months in jail, not prison, but what I found really amusing was that the biggest, baddest dude on my cell block ran a D&D game twice a week. I would have loved to have D&D in jail. Played a lot of spades and Risk though. Also the first day I got moved to higher security I was at the TV table watching The Breakfast Club and 16 Candles with a bunch of felons. Was hilarious to me. Hey, won't say what I did but there is no RP, intercourse seemed to be consensual. We didn't get cells, just a big room with bunk beds and overcrowded. I spent my first 3 weeks sleeping under somebody's bed. People are kind and genuinely interested in listening to you because they have nothing else better to do and are depressed. Yeah, everybody is depressed. Without doubt. You'll be constipated first 3-5 days. Nobody cares if you drop the soap. There is a lot of theft and people usually get away with it because you can't stay awake 24/7. But beating up the biggest guy there is just childish. I got in one fight and it was broken up before anything happened. Nobody claims to be innocent. For me, prison was just like boarding school without the classes. A friend of mine went to prison and he told me about his experience. Apparently the biggest feeling he got was being bored. There's very little to do there, so he ended up working out a ton and actually got a certificate for computer repair. I guess they had some kind of opportunity for education. This is in Canada, and he said that there was a pretty big racial divide. There were white people, black people and Aboriginal people. The black people and Aboriginal people got along pretty well, but the white people segregated themselves quite a bit. I reckon it's different depending on the jail itself. Another thing he mentioned was the noise. After he got out, he didn't really listen to music, and always wanted to just chill. We played a lot of chess, and sat quietly for the first few weeks. He said that there was so much yelling and nonsense in jail and you don't really get to escape that. He is a pretty big guy, and apparently he got in one fight. He said that he didn't start it, but explained that if he had not fought then he would have been constantly harassed until he did. So he conceded, and beat the crap out of the guy who started it. He didn't get caught, and nobody bothered him after that. When he got out, he told me repeatedly that he would do anything to not go back, and that if he ever went back, he would likely kill himself. Unfortunately he has FASD, and started doing drugs again, got caught DUI, with drugs intended to sell. He's back there now, and I have no idea how to get in touch with him. It's been a few years now and frankly I'm scared to know. Media gets a lot of procedural aspects of it right, but the atmosphere is decidedly less tense than Hollywood would have you believe. On Christmas morning one year I recall casually walking in the prison yard drinking a mocha and smoking a black and mild cigar. For example, conducting myself largely as I would at any holiday resort with medium security. I saw a dude stabbed to death over a lengthy phone call, but I also saw a bona fide prison wedding that was surreal beyond anything I've seen on film. Mostly though, it's boring as frick and a complete waste of time, money, and human potential. That part of it tends not to jump off the screen, so it's often omitted in artistic works. Your outside chess game is stunningly weak compared to an inmate's chess game. For some reason this is my favorite comment in this whole thread. Like all I can imagine now is Magnus Carlsen getting wrecked by tattooed cover dudes in orange jumpsuits. My brother is currently in prison. He did have one run-in with a gang that made him have one of his family members send money or they would hurt him, but other than that he has been doing well. Got a state certificate for carpentry and HVAC. also has taken some college courses. It seems that he has been pretty well rehabilitated. He also said that he feels no shame anymore. He said he will probably come home and just crap with the door open with no fricks given. So I was a CO for Corrections Canada at maximum security facilities in Ontario, but I worked at all levels. I have a different perspective than the community population, but I'll give her a stab. Maximum security prisons are generally filled with people who belong there. They require special handling, are prone to violence and often very good at manipulation. Consequently, we try to have as professional a working relationship with them as possible. Swiping a baton over the doors and screaming "get up, sucker" doesn't happen. There is very little prisoner pay as there are more than enough willing volunteers. Gangs. You're not forced to join a gang, but many do. In Canada, the Native Brotherhood, Aryans, Mafia, Russians, Asian are all present. We're starting to see Ms. 13 and Sir 13, a specific prison set of the Mexican Mafia. In most cases, gang activity is fairly obvious, and for that reason, planned attacks are usually foiled. Violence is random. A guy knocking into another guy and not saying sorry. Rival gang members getting into a squabble. Someone fricked someone over food from the canteen, etc. When there is planned violence, it requires a very strict procedure, and we usually have to investigate heavily, tossing cells, interviewing gang members, etc. In Canada, if you have a release date, are a non-violent or reformed offender and aren't pulling life in administrative segregation, though some people in ADSEG do get them, you can get what Corrections Canada calls PFV or private family visits, trailer, linens, kitchenette. Usually, families would bring food and they'd spend 2 days together. You could smell the cooking. Married people do what married people do, I guess. We randomly inspect if we think something is up, but we're pretty good at leaving you alone if you are trustworthy. The biggest myth? Prisons aren't chaotic and the prisoners don't run the show. When prisoners say that they can cause a lockdown to plan attacks, what do you think we think is going on? Why do you then have your cell tossed? Because we can see you. We're not stupid. Causing an alarm is the easiest way to have people, especially from rival gangs, turn on you and give us information. They don't want to be locked down. They want out. It depends entirely on where you are. Overcrowded gang-infested state prisons where people carry shivs and you associate with people outside of your race at your peril? Yes, those exist. Dull county lockups where everyone is serving less than a year for low-level offenses and are no more violent than a typical high school? Those exist too. Violence ranges in severity but is less often of a sexual nature than portrayed. In the county lockup where I've been, fistfights were not uncommon and were usually mutual. Stealing from another inmate or being in for charges involving sexual offenses against children might get you beaten, but otherwise it was easy to avoid violence. Our pay would have been completely unheard of. If anyone had a weapon, I doubt anyone did. It was because they were paranoid and stupid, not because they were hard. This was my experience from a few months at a rural-ish county lockup where a lot of the prisoners and guards knew each other from high school. Throw a bunch of regular blue-collar guys in their 20s and 30s into a pen together and there's going to be a little friction sometimes. But no one is getting up-head or shanked. That's probably most county jails. Two unusual things that are more common in real life than on screen. 1. Prison burritos. A lot of guys like to make weird junk food loaves from various junk food sorta mashed all together and call it a burrito. Apparently this is a nationwide thing. Prison haggis would be a more accurate term for it. 2. Spades. I have never played or seen anyone playing spades outside of jail. If I did, I'd probably assume they've been to jail, because the card game is big in jails. Never been to jail. Love spades. I spent 3 years in the federal prison system in the United States as a 20 years old, white, college-educated female with no prior history with law enforcement. Though my crime was drug-related and non-violent, it was technically classified as a violent crime, so I was placed in a medium security facility where I was exposed to far more high-level drug dealers, murderers, and terrorists. As a pre-trial federal inmate, I also spent over a year at various New England county jails, so I got a pretty broad survey of the system in both the Northeast and the Deep South. I got to fly Con Air a few times as well. The thing that affected me most deeply was what I learned about people. While many of the inmates were people society had basically dismissed as human garbage, I would say 90% were good people who were placed in poor circumstances and made poor choices. I believe in personal responsibility. However, I gained a great deal of compassion for the women I ended up knowing who had been thrown away for years, their kids growing up without them, because they got involved with drugs or a bad boyfriend. Most of them had experienced a lot of trauma in their lives and just didn't have the resources to cope in a more pro-social way. Though women are often catty, in general people respected and supported each other. I very rarely felt unsafe, even as the anomaly that I was. I stood up for myself, but in one instance where I was being harassed and threatened, the old heads in my unit, long-term respected inmates, intervened on my behalf without my asking. My first night in prison I was terrified until a bunch of people came to ask me if I needed anything, a snack, some sweats to borrow, hygiene products. The worst people in many cases were the guards. Most were just people trying to do their jobs, but for many an environment of complete power with limited, if any, oversight, brought out some seriously sadistic behavior. The actions I saw and experienced from correctional staff will stay with me forever. Imagine a situation where you can be strip searched because the officer feels like it. They make you spread your butt cheeks and squat for them. I saw them get bored and harass a mentally challenged woman until she reacted so that they could strip her, pepper spray her, and beat her, because they were bored. I could go on for a while. But in general, prison is a microcosm of the world, and I saw the best and worst of human nature in my time there. It's nothing like people think. Boring, boring, boring. Every day just like the last. There were fights, but they weren't what you see in the movies. Don't disrespect people inside and you won't get beaten up outside. I was in minimum security federal prison. I was convicted of possession with intent to distribute methamphetamine. It went federal because we crossed some state lines and had imported a ridiculous amount of M into the state. It was my fiance that was selling. I only got charged because I went to one controlled buy with him. They had nothing else on me. Prison was far less scary than everyone tells you. The worst part is the petty BS. It's juvenile arguments and things that would never matter on the outside are a big deal inside. The best example I have is I almost got into a fist fight over a dryer. The bee kept opening it to see if my clothes were dry. They weren't, and it was taking longer because she kept opening it. It's that kind of crap that gets sold. The weirdest thing to me was that almost all of the women had prison moms. It was an older woman that would look out for their daughter. My bunkmate was 50 and had a mom that was 65. I was 19 and didn't have one, which was mind-blowing for some of the other women. I didn't need anyone while I was there. I was on my own and that's how it stayed. I had a few friends, but for the most part I kept to myself. The guards were mostly men, so that caused problems. There were a bunch of guards getting favors from the girls. Not really surprising, I guess. It always seemed to be consensual and usually a tit-for-tat kind of arrangement. We did have one person come into the prison that was physically female, but he identified as a man. He had incredibly small boobs and I am almost certain he'd started hormone treatments. The girls fought over him. There was a bunch of gay for the stay going on. I never participated, because frankly, no one there was my type. I'm bi, so it wouldn't have been a big deal, but I also went in there with the mindset of doing my time and never looking back. My daughter was 4 months old when I left her at the front gates with my parents. I was not going to get attached to someone inside and have that kind of heartbreak when I got out. I was solely focused on getting out, staying clean, and making a better life for her. I've been sober for 12 years now. I've been to prison multiple times up and down the state of California in the 90s and 2000s. I can assure everyone it's way worse than any movie will ever make it out to be, with one exception. Never once did I ever see any prisoner pay when I was there. I was on a main yard, non-PC, so no homosexual activity is allowed. The worst part of it no doubt was the racial tension. All it could take is a white guy to not be looking up walking to chow, and he bumps into a black guy and doesn't say excuse me, and within 2-3 minutes a full-out riot had escalated in the entire prison. The riots are just ugly. You're informed of where a war chest, a hidden spot where shanks are kept for riots and fights, is when something like this happens. And basically you have to stand with your people or it's going to come back at you, and 100 times worse because you didn't back your people. Doesn't matter if you claim Christian, which does happen, beforehand. If you're white and a riot breaks out, you better somehow be involved and not hiding under a bunk bed somewhere. For the most part, most convicts just want a program, go to a prison job, keep a routine going, etc. But every once in a while you get some knucklehead 19-year-old on the yard who wants to make a name for himself and creates drama where none should have been in the first place. Kid wants to make life miserable for everyone around him, and even worse, other races, setting off the yard like a dynamite stick. The constant worry about outside life if you are in a relationship is pretty bad too. Guys joke about Sancho, Mexican term for a man who steals your woman while you're locked up, but some guys literally stress over what their woman is doing on the outside, which leads to more fights and riots. I haven't been back in 7 years and I've cleaned up well and now manage a retail store, but I still have nightmares about those prison fights and riots to this date. I was in a minimum restricted prison and it was not bad at all. It was 2 levels above the lowest security, nothing I imagine like the maximum. I mean, we had our own rooms with doors we had keys to, private showers and toilets, could order tea versus etc. There were fights occasionally but they weren't bad. Imagine a dorm with a lot of older, mostly undesirable, mostly uneducated men with big egos and a curfew. The prison I was at had a medium and maximum prison on the same grounds and it kept everyone in line pretty much. People were scared to go to the high side. Experience Sterling Correctional Facility, Sterling, Colorado, 2015 to 2016. Colorado, where even the prisons are chill as frick. I'm a prison officer in a UK prison. Thing that surprised me was lack of our pay, and that the prisoners get a penguin, the chocolate, not animal, every day. I spent 6 months in a UK prison. I learned French and computer programming, got a job in the prison canteen and smoked pot every single day, none of it mine. There was so much available. The difference between the US and Commonwealth justice system. Never been a prisoner, but did have interesting visits while working as a plumber's helper putting in boilers. First prison was a male prison, built in the early 1900s. The inmates, they had to work the fields and farm a large percentage of the food supply. Believe it or not, the food was pretty good, especially the pizza. The trustees that worked the boiler room were pretty cool folks, but we did have them apparently steal some copper pipe from us, which was a cluster frick because everything in the van had to be accounted for on the way out. One of them made the mistake of opening a steam valve he thought was off though, and ended up getting his arm blasted with steam, peeling a huge layer of his skin off instantly. Pretty gnarly injury. The other was a women's prison, medical unit. The food at this one was freaking awful. Hot water to drink because they had no ice, and hot turkey salad filled with gristle and bone. IDK how they eat that crap. I couldn't. The guard that was assigned to accompany us told us on our way in that the inmates would make sexual advances at us, but if he saw us even say hi to them he would throw us out, and went on to say, even if you did manage to sleep with one somehow, this is a medical unit, so your dong would probably fall off a few days later. It was an interesting experience, certainly showed me that I sure as crap never wanna end up locked in there though. Spent 48 hours in an Alabama jail. There was a clear hierarchy. Big tough black dude jumped everyone in the shell line, controlled the single TV, etc. Gave my allotted cigarette to said black man, because I don't smoke, not because I'm a B. I'm also a B. So he never bothered me, but he harassed the other new guys constantly. He made them make his bed and BS like that. There was an 18-year there who looked like he was 12. Another inmate stole his property, mostly snacks, and threw them in the showers. When the kid went to retrieve them he was beaten to a pulp. I honestly thought he died. A third inmate spoke up about the beating and was immediately confronted by a fourth and took a nice beating as well. Not too bad though. It was a stressful place. There was some silver lining of sorts. However, the guy who took a beating for speaking up about the kid in the showers was called over by the guy who beat him. He explained that he meant nothing by it and that he was sorry. He said that he was trying to teach him some prison etiquette and county to mind his own business, so when he left, presumably to state prison, he would have an easier time. He had his arm around him almost like a father would. He even gave the guy his jelly packet. Huge deal. At breakfast the next morning as a kind gesture. In my short stay my impression was this: these were decent humans who were put in a stressful situation. They understood that they were all in it together and would help each other out. There was an odd sense of community. You have been visited by the Wealth Rat. Subscribe in 12 seconds and he will share his wealth with you. Thanks for watching. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.